Right, lovely. Hello, my name's John Merry. For those of you who don't know me, up until October 2021, I was a full-time GP in Wollerton. I've also been a medical examiner at the Queen's Medical Centre for the past 2.5 years, and I've been a medical referee at Bramcote Crematorium for the last 25 years. So I have a bit of a foot in all the different camps related to death certification. The presentation I'm going to give is based around the system that we are going to have in Nottingham City and is particularly applicable to those practices who would normally link with Nottingham University hospitals. I'm hoping that Carmel West from Sherwood Forest is on the call because she's going to be able to tell us what's happening in North Notts. I think the process is fairly similar, but every time I do a presentation of this sort, I get questions from North Notts about what the system is up there. So I'm hoping she's going to be able to clarify for us. Emma, if you can start sharing the slides, I'd be grateful. I'm hoping you're going to be able to read all of these. Please put any questions in the chat, or I'm very happy to answer questions at the end. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to cover everything that I've previously been asked on these sorts of webinars, but there's always something new that comes up and I'm always very happy to try and answer questions. So the next slide, please, Emma. Forgive me if I'm going over old ground here, but I think it's prudent just to explain why these changes have been brought into place. Initially, the idea of medical examiners came up after Harold Shipman, but subsequently there have been other incidents, episodes, whatever you may wish to call them, in the NHS that have triggered the possible use of a medical examiner service. There's been the Bristol Heart scandal, there's been issues of mid-staffs, and more recently there have been issues that I'm sure we're all aware of related to maternity services in Nottingham. Next slide, please, Emma. So the system was first proposed as far back as 2003. It was formally introduced as an Act of Parliament in 2009, first introduced in Nottingham in 2018 when scrutinies of secondary care deaths were first started, and became statutory in secondary care from 2020, although all hospital deaths at NUH have been subject to a medical examiner's scrutiny from pretty much the end of 2019. It is going to become statutory that all deaths are subject to a medical examiner's scrutiny from April 2023, and this is really what I'm here to talk about now. Next slide, please, Emma. So there are a couple of keywords in this that I have helpfully underlined, I hope you'll notice. First of all, it is an independent system. So we may work with the hospital, we may work with GP practices, we may work with the coroner, but we are independent of all those organisations. So it's an independent system to review all deaths. And the idea is to improve the accuracy of death certification. I'm old enough to remember a time when death certificates almost universally read bronchopneumonia. It's to increase transparency for bereaved relatives. And then finally, to highlight any governance issues that may arise. I'll give you an example of where that's already taken place. There were a number of deaths related to ERCPs that happened in Nottingham a couple of years ago. Unexpected deaths related to fairly routine procedures. And we were able to flag that up as a medical examiner service, and it was thoroughly investigated. And it came to light that one of the specialists who was conducting these ERCPs was actually doing it in a non-standard fashion, and that's subsequently been sorted out. Just for reassurance, that specialist is no longer doing ERCPs and is no longer in NUH. Next slide, please. There's another key word here about what it's not. We're all used to what's happening at the moment where, with the benefit of hindsight, every single action is criticised or someone tries to find fault. This is not a process of that sort. So we are not sitting there looking for mistakes, looking for errors. All the reviews are carried out by experienced clinicians. In Nottingham, that is a team of about 10 hospital consultants and 4 GPs at the moment. There are 3 new medical examiners due to start fairly soon, and they are all community-based, 1 palliative care, 1 and 2 GPs. So we have a good representation from both secondary and primary care. All the clinicians are experienced. All the reviews are done proportionately. We don't spend 8 hours on a review going through every event in a patient's care with a microscope. We carry them out proportionally. The average review takes between 15 and 30 minutes, and they're done with an understanding of the constraints that are currently there in healthcare. We know about the difficulty in getting scans. We know about the length of time that it takes for a referral to go through. I don't think there'll be any consultants on this call, so I will explain to you that I spend quite a lot of my time as a primary care physician explaining to my consultant colleagues that we cannot order a total body MRI scan. Next slide, please, Emma. So the system has not been designed centrally. For some reason known only to themselves, the Department of Health and the Department of Justice decided that each area would design its own local system. So what we've done in Nottingham is tried to design a system.
Hello, is that Teresa? Hello, Teresa. My name's Lisa, and I'm a medical examiner officer at Kingsmill Hospital.
Right, if somebody can just turn the microphone off, that'd be great. Thanks very much. So it's been designed locally to try and minimise extra workload and delays. We're not in the business of making your lives harder. It's been based on a system that we copied from Sussex, where it's been working for about a year and apparently working quite well. We have piloted it with a number of local practices. We've gone through the LMC and the ICB, and they are both quite supportive of it. It's hosted by NUH, but isn't run by NUH. And it will feed into other local services such as death review services, but will remain fiercely independent of those services. So this comes to the bit which is based on what's happening in Nottingham, and I'm hoping Carmel will be able to explain what's happening at Sherwood Forest in a moment. Next slide, please. So in Nottingham, what happens? The practice will be informed that a patient has died. That will either be a relative phoning up, the nursing home sending a form across, the district nurses filling a form in, or possibly from the ambulance service or even the coroner. When that notification takes place, reception will be asked to record a few details. In particular, what we would like them to record is the date and time of death, where the patient died, who verified the death, most importantly, some contact details for the next of kin, and finally, if they know it, where the deceased now lies. The fact that the patient has died is then passed on to the GP. And really, this is the GP's only responsibility, is to formulate a suggested cause of death. And then there is a little box on the referral form for any comments if the GP wishes to make those. It is not compulsory to make any comments. What we're finding is in about half the referrals, comments are made, and the other half of the referrals, there aren't any comments, and it really doesn't matter. The information will then be passed to the secretaries, who will complete the medical examiner referral form. Sorry, guys, it's another F12 referral form. It's sent by the ERS system, so the electronic referral system. This is the same system that we use to do all our referrals on, and your secretary will be very, very familiar with how this system works. If you can do the next slide, please, Emma. I just wanted to chuck in a picture of the referral form at this stage. The bit I wanted you to notice was the bits, or how much of it is in red. And all these bits are bits that autofill from the GP computer system, either System 1 or EMIS. And you can see the information that we're asking to be autofilled, apart from patient demographic details, is the information we need to conduct a scrutiny. So it contains the current active problems, the significant past problems, current medication, including the medication issues, so we know what medication has been issued to patients, any allergies. Probably the most important thing is the last 6 months of consultations. From System 1, that often runs to 100+ pages in a very difficult to look at format, but that's our problem, not your problem. And the latest results. At the bottom, there's a little section called relevant letters. Now, most of the letters about our patients will be from NUH, just because of the area that we're in, and we can actually get all those letters from the hospital computer system. However, if there are important letters that come, say, from a private consultant or from abroad that you think would be relevant to formulating a cause of death, we would ask if you would include those. We don't need you to include the vast majority of them, and if they come from NUH, we don't need you to include them. But that is just an area where sometimes it's helpful. If there is something that is missing that we think we need to do an accurate scrutiny, we'll get in touch with you and let you know what it is and arrange to get hold of it. And that's one of the reasons why, of preference, we would love to have the practice bypass telephone number at the top of the form rather than the usual number. We've all had the experience of sitting on the phone waiting for GP practices to answer. Next slide, please. So once we've got all that stuff together, we will conduct a scrutiny. So we will look at the GP records and the hospital records, and we will propose an independent cause of death. Once we propose the cause of death, two things happen virtually simultaneously. We will consult with the GP practice. Now, that's normally done by way of email. Our experience shows that 95% of the time we agree either completely or with only some very minor alterations with the suggested cause of death from the GP practice. And under those circumstances, we will send you an email basically saying, yes, we agree with everything you say, and we agree with the proposed cause of death. We might make a minor suggestion to alter things. So, for example, if you put subarachnoid hemorrhage and you don't put spontaneous down, the registrar will reject that and send it back to you. Ditto with something like bowel perforation. Sometimes we know the histology of a cancer that you don't know, and we will suggest that you put that in. If we differ wildly from what you're suggesting, then we will attempt to contact you and actually have a telephone conversation. Our view is no more valid than your view about what the cause of death is. And the idea is that we come to an agreement about the cause of death. We don't impose one upon you. At the same time, the medical examiner's officers will contact the next of kin. This is why we need the information about the next of kin. This is, in my opinion, extremely valuable. The medical examiner's officers are all highly experienced at dealing with bereaved relatives. They're very good at explaining the cause of death. They're very good at answering the sorts of questions that quite often get asked by relatives. Again, a common example from hospital practice is, my relative didn't get a drip and wasn't given water for the last 48 hours. Did this contribute to their death? Well, they're able to explain that this is part of a palliative care process, and to actually put a drip up or to try and force fluid down them might actually cause them more distress and didn't actually contribute to the death of a patient that's actively dying. The other thing the medical examiner's officers will sometimes find out is stuff that we didn't know as GPs. For example, the patient that died of adenocarcinoma of the lung between the ages of 20 and 25, worked at the power station, was exposed to asbestos, and that may mean that they have a claim that the death is industrially related and needs referring to the coroner. I'll come on to the coroner in a minute. Finally, once we've agreed on the cause of death, we've had contact with the next of kin, we will send an email confirmation to the practice with a copy of the medical examiner's scrutiny, which we suggest you file in the notes, but you can also use to fill in cremation forms and the like, just copy and paste off it. Next slide, please. So, if a coroner's referral is needed, the first thing is, even if you feel it's absolutely bond or obvious that a coroner's referral will be needed, please still refer to the ME service. Again, I'll give you an example of a case I did at the hospital yesterday, where a patient had basically died of smoke inhalation following a house fire, ended up at Queen's and died 24 hours later. We still did a medical examiner's scrutiny on that before we passed it on to the coroner. We will process the referral to the coroner on your behalf. So the coroner's agreed to accept the ME referral paperwork. So there will be no more filling in the coroner's forms for you. I hope that's an advantage to you. We'll only do that after letting you know that that's needed. We will also inform the relatives that the referral has gone to the coroner and explain the process and everything attached to that, which again will save you some work. And the fact that the case is referred to the coroner does not necessarily mean it'll go forward for inquest. Quite often we will be able to suggest the cause of death, and the coroner is quite happy to accept that. Next slide, please. From the 1st of April, I'm afraid the coroner is going to start rejecting referrals that haven't come through the ME service. So unfortunately for you, you're going to be forced to do this from the 1st of April. And wherever an ambulance is called out to a patient death, the coroner is actually contacted and told about this death. And we may start almost immediately contacting you, asking you for a referral where we've been informed by the coroner that this may be necessary. Next slide, please. The reason the coroner is so keen on this is that we can significantly reduce their workload, which is of advantage to the coroner, but is also of advantage, we feel, to GPs and to patients' relatives where the delays associated with the coroner aren't introduced. So I did a quick review of cremation forms over a period of a month. I don't know whether you can see that, but about 15% of the cremation forms came from the coroner. Of the others, there were about equal proportions of hospital and community deaths. Of the community forms, 29% went to the coroner and were just passed through. And looking at these 22 forms, it's my belief that 3/4 of them would not have needed a referral to the ME service, to the coroner rather, if they'd had an ME review. Main reason for referral to the coroner was related to time, so the time when the patient was last seen, over 28 days, and on 13 occasions, that was the reason for referral. On a couple of occasions, it was diagnostic uncertainty, and then there were a couple of other referrals that we think we could have got rid of. If we can have the next slide, please. This is also reflected in what's happened at Queen's. If you look at the 3 lines here, the red line is all deaths. The grey line is the number of ME scrutinies, and as you can see, the proportion of ME scrutinies going up, the number of coroner referrals goes down. And at Queen's, it went from around about 75% of the deaths being referred to the coroner down to around about 15 to 20%. And that has persisted since then. It's remained pretty much stable. Next slide, please. So I'm hoping that all the Nottingham GP practices have now received a welcome pack. It is available on F12 and TeamNet, and in this welcome pack is the referral form, a very detailed guide to making the referral via the ERS system. There's a bereavement guide that can be sent to relatives. This is really useful, I think. We only deal with the death of a relative perhaps 2 or 3 times in our lives, and a guide to how that works, how to register, what the ME service is, I think is really, really useful, and is something I would recommend sending to all relatives. There is a guide in there about who can fill in an MCCD, a guide to which cases need coroner's referral. There's a lot of information about information governance. This was one of the big issues that was raised when we first started bringing this up. And there's also contact details for the ME service. Next slide, please. So one of the things in here is a guide to who can complete a medical certificate about the cause of death, and it's quite a straightforward flow chart. One of the main reasons for referral to the coroner was, I think, for reassurance that yes, you are okay to write a death certificate. And from our point of view, the 3 critical features are: have you seen the patient in life at any stage during the last illness? And where you're dealing with an illness like old age or dementia, that can be over quite a long period of time before they die. Do you know the cause of death? And that can be from the records, because we all know modern practice these days is that we almost act in a consultancy role with the district nurses and palliative care nurses seeing patients on a regular basis. And if you have seen the patient at any stage during the last illness, and if you know the cause of death, then provided you go and see them after death, you can write a death certificate. Death certificates and cremation forms are not actually the same. So what has been happening is patients have been referred to the coroner has said it's okay to write a death certificate, and the death certificate has been written and the cremation form has been written without seeing the body after death. Actually, legally, to write a cremation form, if you haven't seen them in the 28 days before death, you do need to see them after death. Not all medical referees are firm about this. We haven't been being firm about it at Bramcote, but it may be something that we get stamped on for. Next slide, please. Just finally, I thought I would talk about how we do a scrutiny. I think this is both interesting, or I'm hoping it's interesting, but also quite reassuring. So the information that we need is at the top. What we're looking for is 3 things. We're looking for natural versus unnatural deaths. So quite often, the patient has ultimately died of a natural disease process. For example, they have got bowel cancer. You'll find patients quite often come in and have an operation done to try and treat that bowel cancer and then die later. It wasn't the operation that caused the death. It was the bowel cancer that caused the death. It was just that the operation was unsuccessful. And under those circumstances, it's a natural death. Different circumstance would be a patient who was made paraplegic in a road traffic accident 30 years ago, developed pressure sores and died as a result of the pressure sores. That would be an unnatural death because the road traffic accident started the chain of events that led to the death. The next thing we're looking at is the sequence of events so that we can formulate a coherent death certificate. So, for example, we would maybe put something down like multi-organ failure, secondary to sepsis, secondary to a chest infection. So 1A would be multi-organ failure, 1B would be sepsis, 1C would be the chest infection. What you sometimes see is in 1B things that are completely unrelated to 1A, and that's one of the areas where we may recommend a slight change in the death certificate. And finally, the thing we look at is, does this death need a coronial referral? I'm going to emphasize again that this is not a process designed to find fault with the benefit of hindsight. Next slide, please, Emma. Right, so various concerns have been raised when we've discussed these issues in the past. I'm hoping that I can answer those. The first one is about workload. I know I've been a working GP up until very recently, and I know it's worse now than it was when I retired 18 months ago. How busy you guys are out there. Workload-wise, for a GP, this takes less than 5 minutes of GP time. On average, an individual GP will have to deal with 1 per month. Obviously, some practices with lots of nursing homes will have more, some practices will have fewer, but on average, it will be 1 per month per GP. It takes between 5 and 10 minutes of admin time. All these things we believe are compensated for by fewer and easier coroner's referrals, fewer queries from the registrar, and in particular, fewer complaints. This is where the intervention of the medical examiner's officers, talking to relatives, the fact that the relatives can be reassured that the case has been reviewed by a senior independent doctor, we believe significantly reduces complaints. It certainly does in the hospital service, and we think it'll do it in general practice. And given that dealing with a typical complaint takes between 3 and 4 hours, I think the workload considerations hopefully will be compensated for by the reduction in workload in other areas. Second area that people were worried about was confidentiality. There is some information in the welcome pack, but basically, to summarize, the referrals are sent by the ERS system. We use that on a daily basis for electronic referrals. Any correspondence will be sent by a secure nhs.net account. All the MEs and most of the MEOs are clinicians. They are subject to their own confidentiality agreements. And finally, it's required by statute. We've got to do it anyway. Next slide, please. Next concern that I've discussed with people is about expedited death for religious reasons and in the hospital for organ donation. Provided we know it's an expedited death, we will turn the scrutiny around in 1 hour. Basically, between 9 and 4, every day there is an ME in the office. And all we would ask is that at the same time as you send the referral through, you just phone the office and say, I'm sending an expedited referral through, and we'll turn it around in an hour for you. Promise. Just for reassurance, getting through to the bereavement office at Queen's is a great deal easier than getting through to a GP practice, except perhaps at 10 a.m. on a Monday morning for about an hour. And finally, if you know a patient is dying and that they're going to want an expedited death, then we can, or an expedited certification, then we can offer something called a pre-scrutiny. So basically, send us the information, we'll do the scrutiny based on the information, and assuming nothing dramatic happens in the subsequent day or so, then you'll have the scrutiny in your hand. The final thing is about delays to certification. So we are aiming for a 1 working day turnaround. Most GPs do not work full time, and I don't think that's going to introduce any unnecessary delays. And from the point of view of the relatives, fewer coroner's referrals, which we know introduce a delay of between 4 and 5 days, will hopefully be advantageous in this sense. Next slide, please, Emma. This is my final slide. So again, this applies to Nottingham practices. The referrals are now all open to all practices via the ERS system. The information is on F12 and TeamNet. You should have been sent a welcome pack. But if you, for some reason, haven't got this information, then if you please contact the bereavement office or you contact me personally, I will make sure you get it. And if you're struggling, if there are problems, just let us know. We'll come out and see you. We'll come out and make it work for you. You know, our job is to make your lives easier, not harder. And then the final slide of mine is just some contact details. So there's one of these funny, long, complicated emails for the bereavement service. But if you have any problems, just john.merry@nhs.net. I check it virtually every day, even though I'm retired, and I will get back to you as soon as I can and try and help out. Now, I'm hoping Carmel West is on the call from Sherwood Forest, and hopefully she will be able to just talk a little bit about how things are working in North Notts. And thank you very much for your attention. And if there are any questions, perhaps after Carmel has spoken, we can between us answer all of them. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you for the invite to today's meeting. Pretty much on the back of what John's discussed, the process here at SFH is almost identical. I would say 99% of the areas are as John has explained. We had been working, we'd gone via the PCNs and we've had meetings with all 6 of our PCNs since September time of last year. For Mid-Notts, which is Mansfield, Ashfield, Newark and Sherwood, we have about 40 GP practices in our area. And as of today's date, we've probably engaged now with about 20 to 25 of them. In terms of the initial documentation, we were doing it, our form was placed on one of the templates. So each of the PCNs had actually uploaded a template onto System 1, and that was being used by the admin teams within there. And there was a pathway organised within each division. What we were hoping to do now, move forward, now that John's established everything's going on, it can be available on the F12, is update that record so that we've got a specific form for the Mid-Notts area as well with our contact details on. Like John had said originally, a lot of the key information we're looking for obviously is the date and time of death, verification, and the occupation element, if that's known. If not, that will be picked up from an occupation point of view when we speak with the families. We also have a designated mailbox that we communicate with our GPs through, which is manned via our teams. Currently, we have an ME on site between the hours of 10 and 6, and we will endeavour, again, like John had suggested, to turn around things to the GP practices within the 24, maximum 48-hour window. Some of that will depend on how quickly we can get hold of families. So the contact number is vital so that that will help smooth that process through. Bypass numbers are like gold dust. They are really good to help us get through to the GPs. And some of my practices have also given me the practice manager's numbers. So I've got a plan B if I can't get through. And that tends to be a mobile, I think, in a lot of our areas. In terms of the coroner's referral, what John was speaking about, we are not currently on an electronic form at this end. So we will not be sending the coroner's referrals. But what we will do, if there is any element on there that we feel from an ME we want you to include, we will, within our email response to you, we will put it through as a document that you can just cut and paste and add onto the document and send it through to the coroner in the normal process. I envisage that will change, but I will keep my teams updated as to how that will look moving forward. From our office, our MEOs, all of our MEOs are non-clinicians, and we're also hoping to get on board Layla who currently works at the coroner's office. She's joining our team at the end of this month as one of my MEOs. So it'll be good to have the insight from the other side as to what we can do better and how we can work better with our GPs as well. I think that's about it, John. On the back of what you said, if there are any of my GP practices on the call, my direct number here at SFH is 01623 622515, and I'm on extension 4712. And I will happily link in with each of you. And as John had also said, more than happy to come and meet the teams and take everyone through the process on a one-to-one basis, which we have done with a handful of our practices up in the north. So that's about it from my end, John. I don't think there's anything else I need to add at this moment.
Thank you very much, Carmel. I have got some cases, but I think I've taken far too much of anybody's time. So if there are any questions, Emma, can you sort of facilitate those, and I'll do my best to answer them.
Yeah, thank you both so much for joining and sharing that information. I think it's been really useful. We've got some questions in the chat that I'll go through if that's okay. So I think some of them have already been answered by Maria. I can see she's been responding to some of them. So we've had a question about the copies of the protocol and how it's done, but as I said, that's on TeamNet and should have gone out. It's a welcome email. If you haven't got that, the email address is in there to request a copy, and they can send one over for you. So at 12:24 in the chat, Anita Smith's asked, we deduct the patient as soon as we're informed of the death. You cannot refer on ERS a deducted patient, so we have to keep the patient registered, and this has caused some issues. Can we refer by email if the patient is deducted? You can see that further down, Marie's responded to say to send the referral by ERS before deducting the patient is preferred, but if that's not possible, then there is an email address to send that to. Is that the same for Sherwood Forest?
It is, and I know from the practice managers that I've been linking in with, they've made it part of their protocol not to delete off the system until such time as the referral to the ME service has been done.
Thank you. And so, Carmel, I think this one's for you. So the welcome pack that John's mentioned, is that relevant to Midnots, or is there a separate referral form?
I can have a look at the one that John's done, and if necessary, I can adapt it. Not a problem.
Brilliant, thank you. And so Dr. Summers at 12:25, is it not time for us to widen who can count as seeing the patient within 28 days after death, i.e. ANPs, etc.? Current arrangements do not seem to be keeping up with the change in care processes and the wider team that is involved.
Talk to the Department of Justice and the Department of Health. That's a little bit above my pay grade, but basically I agree.
Yes, and it would make our lives a lot easier from an acute point of view as well, with our AMPs who do a phenomenal job.
And for what it's worth, when I was discussing this with Miss Casey, the coroner, the other day, she agrees entirely that legal practice has not kept up with, or the legal rules have not kept up with current practice.
Thank you. So people are asking for copies of the slides and minutes. So as we mentioned, we are recording the session for those who aren't able to join us. So we'll ensure that's circulated. And John, are you happy for me to share the slides in our newsletter?
Yes, with the greatest of pleasure.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, just going through. So Debbie Swain's asked, will the SFH form auto-populate?
Yes.
And Dr. Butts asked, all Midnots practices have Arden's templates, so he can organise the referral letter and autofill demographics, the referral form. So that's more of a comment. And then Dr. Summers, it would be good to have an equally seamless process in Midnots to the south, please, moving forward ASAP, i.e. we don't want to miss out on the advantages of the MEs referring directly to the coroner.
No, we don't. And, you know, we have tried over a number of months to engage with our GP practices. And I know we've gone via the PCN routes, and I understand that's probably not filtering down to all the GPs, but I will endeavour to link in with each GP practice over the next week or so. I will make it a mission.
Brilliant. Thank you, Carmel. Are there any more questions from the group at all?
Sorry, where is it on TeamNet, please?
There is a section, I believe, called End of Life, and it's in there.
Okay, I'll have a look, thank you.
It should be in there. I have to say I was never a big user of TeamNet, which is why we should have also sent it to your practice manager. So if you can't find it, have a word with your practice manager, because he or she should have got the welcome pack, and they can always forward it to you.
I am my practice manager. I don't have
Oh,
to
right,
welcome
well,
back. That's why I was having a look on TeamNet.
Oh, well, in that case, if there are any problems, just email me, and I will and I will make sure you get resent it. In fact, Marie, who's kind of doing a lot of the admin at Queen's, is probably sending it to you as we speak, or sending you an email as we speak, telling you where it is.
Copy me in, Marie, and then I can make sure all of our practice managers receive that as well. That'd be lovely.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, James.
Hi, thanks Carmel and John for the presentation. It's really good. Carmel, I'm in mid-knots, and I don't think you need to go back to practices individually about this. I think that everyone here will agree that if you get a form sent through to you, that really needs to be sent off to the coroner directly, as it does in Nottingham. So I think that just needs to be in place as soon as possible. I think everyone can agree with that. So I don't think you need to engage with individual practices to get that in place or in motion, really.
What, in terms of the ME service doing the coroner's referral, or?
Yes, absolutely, because
Right.
otherwise it's duplicating work, and as John said, you know, the whole point of this, the whole trade-off is that we lose some work in other ways, but we have to do this because it's statutory, but duplicating work is not what we want to do.
Yeah, I will have a word with my lead ME on that note.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Dr.
Khalid, you're on mute.
Right, I'd just reinforce what James just said. Both James and myself are mid-knot CDs, so blame us if any practice gets back to you. We want a seamless service. We don't want I would say, less good service than, you know, the Central Knots people are getting.
Won't be less of a service, Khalid.
I know, but if you have to send a letter back, email back to us, and then we have to do the coroner's service, I think that's not quite as seamless as the Central Knots doctor seem to be getting. So yes, I think just go ahead with it. Absolutely.
Fabulous.
Thank you. Any further questions at all? No? Okay, well, thank you both so much for joining us. I think it's been a really useful and helpful go over the process of what's due to come and what's expected of practices and what they should expect coming up. I think it's been really useful. So thank you both so much. And I'm sure if there are any further questions, we'll be in touch very soon.
Thank you very much for facilitating this, Emma.
Thank you.
Just to emphasise that my personal contact details are on there. Feel free to get in touch with me, and I will do my very bestest to sort it out for you. And I'm sure Carmel will do exactly the same thing.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Hope you all have a lovely week, and we will see you all next week.
Thank you very much, Emma.
Take care, guys. Thank you very much.